So we are live. Another week, or another fortnight, I should say,
Yeah.
and another podcast from us. So we were thinking, so hello everybody who is here. So we were thinking, our home team was thinking, we do have behind the walls discussions, and we
Mhm.
had a discussion about where to from here, and we were thinking that we might focus actually for a longer time than just today on the concept of call or tell,
Right.
call it what you want. So we might do that, so that not to actually hurry too much today. We want to cover all kinds of aspects of the field in a practical manner, but also not to remove the discussion and the reflections, which are always exciting to do, because we are intellectuals. We're not just replicators. We want to actually contribute to the field in a thoughtful manner. So, call history and developments for today. We do have our home team only in half today, but there is more coming, trust me. So there. So where to from here? So one of the first things that we wanted to discuss today is the term call. I might just take us to the next slide that will give us a definition of call and its purpose. So I because of these podcasts, I was just discussing with Lala, a colleague and area former PhD student. Oh, that was a long time ago. He's now publishing like crazy and doing amazing things. So we were discussing it that after Lala has come back to Indonesia and had to expose himself to the literature broader than the text that maybe he was reading with us. The text he was reading with us were very much focused on the things we do here. You can't do everything when you are doing a PhD because there's just not enough life.
Right.
So,
Hello.
what we have, hello Andrew and hello
Hello,
Wang,
Kwang.
good to see you guys here. I knew you'll show up sooner or later.
Hmm.
It's good to be in a team. So, yes, the definition of call. Lala was asking last week or last time we met, ask Andrew about this concept. And today I thought that maybe we will commit some more time rather than a short one sentence explanation. There is definitely an interesting call. And I think that one of the things I would like to emerge from our discussion today is that leadership in call, this is my personal view. I don't
Yeah.
think that everybody wants to go through the philosophical and neuroscience readings as maybe Lala or Andrew are doing, and I can see now Gweng also fighting there on the international stage. Not everybody has the time for it, to
Mm.
make the commitment necessary to invent new things or reflect it. But I think that we need leadership that can take us on more steady ground. So we will focus on on the concept of call and its purpose and how each of us thinks about it and why. How call evolved, for example. This is the sort of things I wanted Andrew to maybe talk about. Um, how is it that I just, because of these discussions or these podcasts, I have to do a thorough literature review, something that normally I wouldn't have had time to do it because there's always something better to do, like finish a paper or something which is more focused. But doing the literature review for today's broadcast made me actually find this article. I haven't produced reference on this slide, but it doesn't matter. You can find the paper written by Lomitska, or in English you read it as Lomika and Lord, right?
It's Lara
So that
Mitska.
will do. Yeah, so that's right. It's a very Polish reading of her surname. Anyway, so because that's how I read it. That's a phonological collection of phonemes, right? Lomitska. There's not Womitska, but I can't read it as Lomika. Sounds really weird. Anyway, look what she's writing. It's not what she's writing, but look at the date, 2019 paper, where they say that although coal has indeed made great strides in the past several decades, we are still at a stage in which technology is being used superficially in our classes. So I teach discourse analysis. So what do we have here? We don't have a critique of coal. So coal is good. So here's one group. So coal. But what are they here in this quote, in this paragraph, contrasting? What they are contrasting is called as coal is research and coal is practice. Now, I don't know where they got it from, because I feel that if coal as practice is progressing in the way that these authors are saying is superficial and not necessarily satisfying, then I would say the people who are practicing coal, they actually gone through our little hands. It's called Bachelor of Education, Masters of Education, sometimes PhD. So I don't like when researchers wash off their hands and they say it's their fault. I really like to point the finger at myself and say, what if that's true? Where the heck did I go wrong to make a statement like that? Right? So I would have liked Lara and Lord actually to, and the people who actually use their thoughts to reflect a little bit deeper. And I went through several papers in Calico. So I looked at Calico, some of them from 10, 12 years ago, which I reviewed in some publication that I pointed to last time we met on differentiated learning. It is on my research guide. So I looked at some papers from there, and then I looked at papers from just this year, last year. I couldn't find what I would consider a thorough reflection on the job of call. So maybe Andrew, I would like Lala. Lala has a PowerPoint prepared. So should we start with this voting time here? Who would start? I would like actually to see a reflection on the job of call today. Reflect. Lala, what do you think? You or Andrew? Or Quang? Who's coming first?
Andrew could talk first, I guess. I can talk later.
No,
Andrew
no,
will
no,
make it really
no. Andrew,
complicated.
thank you. Thank you.
So maybe we start with Lala. We start with Lala and
All
see
right.
where Lala is taking the reflections of
I,
his own. Hello,
All right.
everybody. We see some people here on YouTube. So thank you for being here. Indonesia is always coming strong. It's good to see. So I think we will see where Lala is going with it. Then we might take Andrew, who will work with the thoughts and
All right.
well, actually, I was sorry,
continue the discussion
sorry to
on the
interrupt,
job
but
of
I
call.
think, I think Wang should be. I'd like to come last for a change, and
I was thinking that Wang would comment on everybody else, but if
no,
you
I was
want Wang
thinking
to,
I was going to comment on everybody else.
all right.
Um,
So so you said Wang first, right?
I don't. It doesn't matter, Wang or Lala.
All
Maybe
right. We have
Lala, as
Lala
he's prepared,
first because I've got
as he's
his
prepared
PowerPoint.
everything. Yeah.
All right. Could you
Yeah.
show us the PowerPoint on it? All right.
Here
So
you
this is
go. So
actually
just wait,
my
Lala. So you first,
yes.
and then Wang, then Andrew, and then
All right.
Then we'll
So this is
see.
actually a reflection of my research and my students' research. So um, in the last 2 years ago, we've been trying to promote coal at school level, and then my question is it actually possible for us to promote computer-assisted language learning in under-resourced schools in Indonesia? Well, the answer is probably yes. Um, I have here 16 students of mine who have completed their research on digital literacy programs, and then I came up with some interesting findings. But let me just start with a very basic question that I studied in my workshop with my student. Why is it relevant for us to promote call or tell in the context of curriculum merdeka or emancipated curriculum? So in the last 2 years, our government has promoting this new curriculum, merdeka. Then the focus of the school is not on the digital transformation, and this is quite worrying because we still see some problems like teacher-led curriculum, and then the learning process is not student-centered, and then we don't see any strong internet connection at school. And then yes, the schools have computers, but the computers are only used for national exam purposes. So we have some problems in that area. And then for me and my team, when we talk about this new curriculum, then we could actually talk about maintaining the momentum of promoting digital transformation, digital innovation at the school level. There is one uh, paradigm. Well, we have actually a new paradigm clearly mentioned in the new curriculum. The new paradigm says that the learning should be student centered, and then there should be a holistic learning. But I learned a lot from my PhD thesis that multi-sensorial load reduction strategies has all these features in it. So the right hemisphere and left hemisphere involvement is how I translated the holistic learning approach. And then the curriculum also mentions the importance of exploratory learning, but nobody here mentions about the mechanism of brain circuitry, and then no one talks about affective neuroscience, for instance. And then the new curriculum actually addresses the importance of dealing with the essentials. From my thesis, I learned that what is essential is rhythm, intonation, movement, and aesthetics first, and then we can talk more about grammar. So in the past 2 years, I have been trying to conceptualize this in my research program with my students. And then this is actually the sample of research topics that have been completed by my students. We have digital learning resources for expository text. This is interesting because in high school here in Indonesia, there is only one single text that is learned at school. So there is only one single expository text. There is only one single type of narrative text. There is only one single, let's say, procedural text, and so. So my student expanded the typology of expository text. So she developed these six expository text aligned with the CLFR and then the automated readability index that can be used at school to support the differentiated learning. And my other students also developed an integrated diagnostic test because there are no schools, currently there are no schools in Cirebon area that has this diagnostic test. So I think it is important for us to develop this free online digital diagnostic test. And also we have here the DLR for critical listening and for learning English poems and blah blah blah. And the general findings that we have here is that um, we actually have more than 20 schools in our study. No schools have mentioned the importance of digital transformation. So the role of call or tell is actually missing. what is happening in the school level. For instance, this is the general finding from Ellen. I think she's also joining our podcast today. Uh, there is one school that only promotes curriculum Merdeka in terms of project-based learning. So that's actually the feature that is probably easily perceived by the school. What happened there is that the project topic is on the school waste management system, and then the school set up a panel of teachers who function as experts. So the teachers have to serve as someone knowledgeable about waste management system, but the students who were not trained in adaptive learning procedures where they could actually use open data on the types of waste that they produce at schools, or how many or how much rubbish that they actually produce in one particular day or week or month in one particular school, or how much trash that is produced actually within a year by all schools in Cirebon. So the students do not actually have access to that knowledge, and I think this is not relevant with what UNESCO said in 2022, where the transformative curriculum has to have these two dimensions. Number one, the curriculum has to give access to knowledge to students, and then the curriculum has to enable the students to decolonize their learning experiences. So the students could actually make comparisons and make analytical procedures in interpreting the data. So teachers serve as the key source of knowledge regarding waste management. I think this is a big mistake, that let's call it a mistake, or the school has already embraced the new curriculum Merdeka, but since there is no element of digital information or digital learning or digital literacy or call or tell. So the key element of the new curriculum is actually missing. So this is the transformative curricula set out by UNESCO, which I think is relevant with the 21st century learning paradigm. So we actually have now 20 schools in our study. Maybe next year we can go to more than 50 or 100 schools in Cirebon, Kuningan, and Majalengka. It's actually a big area to explore. But yeah, I just want to say that transformative education will never be achieved if call or tell is missing from the school context. So that's my reflection, Anya. Thank you.
Okay, so I have a question to that. So in summary, um, you feel that the project suffered because of students still being positioned as learners rather than as agents,
Right.
and the power was to act critically in Indonesian society was
Yep.
removed from them because the teachers still couldn't see students as capable,
Right. Right.
and they had to transfer the correct knowledge. They acted like public servants
Yep. Yep.
who know where the paperwork lies, the form that you need to complete.
Right. That's the point.
When would you like to comment and add some of your insights?
Yes, basically, I agree with him on the points that, well, and agree with you too as well on the points that I think call is still superficial in our education system, actually, because partially it is the problems of power, it is politics, and teachers are the one who's still holding the power in the classroom, and they are supposed to control the classroom and move the class in the directions that is partially planned by someone else, much more powerful as well, not the teacher themselves.
Wayne, sorry to interrupt. I know that you have more thoughts, and I hope you will not forget them. But I think I want to come back to the point I made right at the start of this podcast, which is um, the teachers were trained. So I want to know. I mean, I know I've read enough to know that the practicum, the system of school practicum, is a little bit different.
Mm.
I'm not saying it's perfect in Australia, far from it, but it's a little bit more different, say, in Cambodia, and definitely in Indonesia, and maybe also in Vietnam. But someone is legitimizing this attitude of teachers, which is what you named as teacher being in power, or teacher centered pedagogy. I think that policies are not saying that. So, if policies are not saying that, how are academics that prepare future teachers? How are they complying with the national policies? I mean, one of the problems we have in Australia is that someone wrote these policies, and we really have no choice. We have to comply. Or obviously, we can say that they are wrong, but until the policies change, we can't say otherwise. In fact, myself, I use policies as my armor, as my
Mm.
weapon. If someone would say to me, "Well, Anya, you shouldn't be doing this," I say, "But the policies say student-centered. The policies say general capabilities like critical thinking and so on. The policies." So I don't know. Are academics deaf to policies? Because I know that you have quite progressive curricula.
Well, I think basically the educational system of Vietnam somehow resembles Australia because, more statistically speaking, Australia is the destination that most Vietnamese scholar uh, go to and take their like postgraduate degree. So most of what we know, most of our knowledge usually comes from Australia. So
That's an
basically,
interesting point,
it's the
Wang. So
same.
you basically pointed the finger away from your PhDs, and you said, "Well, our PhDs don't know anything that they invented themselves. They got it from your country." We once wrote an article with Lala and his colleague Wahid and someone else, Vidya
Hanu?
Hanu. Yeah, Pertiwi. We wrote the paper, but we never really published it. It was the whole paper was written. I don't know. Anyway, where we actually said that.
Mm.
We actually said that in our conclusion. There is a problem. Yeah, I would agree with you, Wang. Do you want to say, keep on, with your reflections? I think that I agree. There is a problem somewhere here as well.
Well, the only thing that I disagree with most people about the application of call is that we usually talk about student centered or learner centered, and I don't agree with that point. Call is not just about like making the student the center of the classroom, and I have always disagreed with the idea of a learner center or a student centered class. Well, what matters is learning centered. Learning should be the thing that is at the center of the whole curriculum. It is not the student themselves. Because when you talk about student centered classroom, it is more like you are treating them as a customer rather than someone who is trying to learn and trying to practice and trying to acquire the knowledge. Um, and and basically that is the problem with us because we always relies on dichotomies. Then we start with the teacher-centered model and then we move to the student-centered model. We always consider the world as two opposite sides. And that is what creating a lot of problem with us, because we think that, well, the application of call is something that will remove the power from the teachers and will totally eliminate the teacher from the classroom. That is why we've been so sluggish with the application of new tools and software. But the problem is that life is much more flexible than that, and we do not just like focus all the time on the students. Sometimes education itself is for the promotion of learning. It is not just about the learner themselves. It is not just about the personalization of education. Well, the personalization of education is good, and it focuses on the here and now need. But what is more important is that after that, learning is promoted.
So,
So,
so in 1993, I'm old enough to actually know these references. There was a publication by Kumarabadivelu. When he was, I don't know, he might have been younger or something. Anyway, he was very much a student of SLI, Second Language Acquisition Studies, and he produced a paper where he differentiated between learner-centered, learning-centered, so learner, learning, and teacher-centered. And obviously he explained these terms, and he explained them in terms of second language acquisition. But I think that it would be nice for Andrew to connect concepts after you finish, to connect concepts call, learner, and learning as well, because I think it's very nice to actually say, why are we sort of choosing our boxes, and then sit comfortably in my little specialization box, whereas maybe we could reflect on the boundaries, whether there are any boundaries in fact between those. Yeah, so is there a place for the teacher? Is there a place for, what's the difference between learner and learning? These things require elaboration, not just an argument, but elaboration. In what way is learner centered and learning centered maybe synonymous or close in meaning? What do you suggest, Wang?
well, I don't think that it is close in meaning. Well, basically, it looks the same in meaning. The student center and the learning centers basically looks the same, but there are many like fundamental distinctions between them. And if we are not be careful with the way that we steer the wheel of education, then that would create a lot of hindrance because
Did
of the
you look
misconception.
exactly? Did you look into those concepts, learner centered and learning centered, from your perspective, not from Kumaravani Valu's perspective,
Yeah, yeah,
your
yeah.
perspective? Can you just give us some more elaboration on whether you differentiate between them and why and how, if so?
So if you can look at learner center, it means that you give the decision, like the total decision, in the hands of the learners, and basically the educational system must be able to fit their needs and their preferences and their characteristics. But when we talked about learning centers, we understand a kind of system that is more neutral. Well, I don't know how to put it, but well, the decision is not 100% in the hands of the learners. There must be someone else as well. Well,
And policies,
accompanying them.
and there are
Yes.
policies, right? And there are policies. The student is not free. It'd be nice to be free, but there is an intervention. Just like when you raise your child, it'd be lovely to have a child all on their own raised. So probably would not speak any language, but there is a parent intervention somewhere. Don't touch this, you burn yourself, or whatever. There is a parent intervention. There are discussions that parents have with children in order to make them aware of certain values. So there is a place, and there are policies, and the policies are about the values that education and the nation actually stands for, and wants to see being present in education. So learning, yes, it's way more than just blind are following what the student wants. So I think yes, I would agree with that. There's more involved. So learning has to be considered as broader than just students' needs, whatever that may mean. Student is not an island.
It is like what they want is not really what they need, and what they need is sometimes not the really necessary things for them to integrate into the world. Well, because what they need is mostly based on a perspective only, and learning education must create a system that tells them that what they really need is not what they imagine it to be. Through interaction with the world and with even policies, with tools, with the people around them, that they know that sometimes they have to put themselves a little bit lower and put some other values or other activities in, like, to give them, to prioritize them in the learning process.
So for now, would you like to add some more concepts? I would like to read to you what concepts we have come up with so far. And it would be very nice to actually continue with those concepts, not just today, but next time when we meet, to push the discussion forward. So we're talking about reflections on the job of Cole. And at this very moment, we had few concepts like digital transformation. I think that's what Lala has come up with. Then student digital transformation is the same as student adaptation to the system. Then we had concepts like superficial approach to Cole. We spoke about power politics and also borrowing knowledge from overseas, maybe uncritically, right? Uncritically borrowing knowledge from overseas. I think I often say it, when you're a student, you go overseas, you fall in love with your supervisor, and then you follow your supervisor. And I think you're kind of like in a servitude relationship with your mentor rather than as partner or even as discussants, which I would have preferred to say. Following can be dangerous because your mentor is not a Jesus or whatever. It's not right. It's not a prophet. It's a person. Learner-centered, learning-centered. So we had those concepts. And I would also want to mention policy somewhere and the curriculum, right? Transformative curricula that are now adopted all over Southeast Asia. I want to read a comment before we progress to the next stage. We have a comment from Azanur Alfia. That's a good way to put it, Dr. Rania. We can actually let our child do what they want, let them be free, but parents still need to be there to put boundaries and give guidance to the right path. Absolutely. We wouldn't speak English if we didn't actually if we weren't interrupted, there weren't any interruptions on present in our process of learning. I mean, we all know about the example of when we were children, we were mispronouncing things. I used to say, instead of saying, I used to think that birds, because people used to, differentiate when they talk about birds. They say this is the pigeon, this is the parrot. I didn't bother. I still am like that. I didn't bother with the detail. I just said I thought that every bird is called bird. So I used to mispronounce things because anyway, I used to do funny things relating to categorization to help myself in this world. And I was interrupted sooner or later. Someone had enough of that. And they told me, well, maybe I should actually correct my classification just to help myself being better understood by other people. So, yes. Should we progress to Andrew? Would you like to take us a little bit from where we are now and continue the discussion with us, maybe in terms that you would like to add?
Yeah, well, I think we've actually covered a huge number of issues, and you know, talking about learning center, learners centered, borrowing knowledge from overseas. All of these things are really quite important, and I'm not quite sure that we're going to be able to cover them today. In fact, I'm sure we won't. Um, and we started the story with call, and we started with Lara Lomitska's statement about call. And while there are many things that I don't agree with in her work generally, I think I do agree with her there. I think that there is a kind of general misunderstanding about call and its usage. It's the kind of usage that we make of it, because call does not mean only one thing. It's a bit like saying, oh, technology is good, technology is bad. But actually, technology is many, many different things. And to generalize like that is problematic. So let's say that we are not making the best use of technology in our classes or anywhere, because we're assuming that everything's happening in classes, and of course a lot of learning is not happening in classes. A lot of language learning is not happening in classes. There are private language schools online which have millions of users, and many more perhaps than are actually enrolled in organizations in universities or schools or whatever. So out of class situations may be very important to take account of. But I'd like to start with borrowing knowledge from overseas, and then we can see where we go with that. I think that a lot of the problems that maybe Lara Lomitska is talking about is that teachers have very limited understandings of what the technology is and what the technology can do. And at the same time, they also have dogmatic understandings of the field of applied linguistics or language pedagogy. So every year when I greet my students in SUT or wherever, I ask them, so what do you know? These are people who are doing PhDs, so they're in the kind of top 2% of society, of intellectual society. These are, or supposedly, they are people who have done master's degrees, a lot from Australia and a lot from elsewhere. But the dogma is persistent and cuts across all countries, let's put it that way, in the field of TESOL. And when you ask them, who are the famous people that you can refer to, they come up with two people. I was looking for a third one. I've forgotten his name for a moment. And the two people are Krashen and Chomsky. Not in that order, by the way. It's Chomsky and then Krashen. And then there is Jeremy Harmer.
Can I interrupt you? I
Yes.
actually asked a population of people involved in English education across the entire country of Cambodia. And I asked about their favorite intellectual, even leaders. And I must say that I can't remember anymore what people came up with. But it just they I don't think they even understood the concept of a mentor or leader or something. I can't remember. It was something to the degree of almost like a dictionary or someone wrote. Like I wish I had that data. I do have it on my computer, but it was unbelievable. Like people don't engage enough to actually have leaders. Like listening, reading to things. And now with podcasts, in education, sorry, I'll just mention it. I teach across a variety of levels and say early childhood as well, but not only. And I often say in my lectures, Jack Panksepp, that I learned about, whom I learned about from Professor Peterson, Jordan Peterson. I myself had no idea he existed. So the guy lived, changed the world, died, and his name is never mentioned in education. Right? It's like he's beyond the scope of two names that are always mentioned in the field. It's a shared illness. It's not just about TESOL.
Yeah, no, well, that's right. That's right. But let's focus on TESOL for a moment. TESOL has tended to be identified as a technical topic. It has tended to be identified as you do your SLA, you do your discourse analysis, you do your micro teaching, you do your bit of comprehensible input from Krashen. You don't mention Chomsky at all because he's irrelevant to language learning. He's not irrelevant philosophically, and he's not irrelevant in terms of the development of linguistics. But he has no impact and cannot have an impact directly unless you're going to worry about concepts like government and binding on language education, and nobody does. So that's one way of looking at it. So people go through the courses and come out with a kind of technical understanding of what they're supposed to do, but they actually don't do it. Right? They don't remember. If you say to people, "Why did you do that?" They don't say, "Oh, well, in Crash in 1983, they said blah blah." It doesn't. It's not how it works. They work on a kind of dogma and a kind of collective memory of what they're supposed to be doing. And I can't think of a better place to discuss this than about the TESOL certificates, which are handed out to all the native speakers, or to many, many native speakers who come to Thailand, Vietnam, and so on. They do 150 hours of tuition. And at the end of the 150 hours of tuition, they're given a certificate which enables them to make some money in the country where they happen to live. And to my amazement, when you ask them about some of the things that what happened to my picture? Is my picture still there? Okay, because it's disappeared from my screen. So if you ask them about why they do things and what they remember, they actually, goodness, my phone's calling. They actually cannot remember why they're doing what they're doing. And a lot of them say, well, we are practical people. We have a textbook. So as practical people, we do what the textbook tells us to do. And we refer this also to the coordinator of the courses that we teach. And they kind of tell us what to do also. Right? So being practical means you do what you're told, whether it happens to be your boss, the administration of the university or the school, or whether it happens to be the course that you've done for 150 hours and that you can't remember. So in the end, you do whatever you feel like doing. And most people feel like basically like doing, like doing lectures, talking about content of courses. But the content of language courses is extremely difficult to identify. I mean, what is the content of a language course? Search me. I don't know what the content of the language course is. Oh, it's the present simple today. Well, maybe it is for you, teacher, but for me, learner, it isn't. Because I don't need it. So we as teachers replicate models of learning where we have things that we must do, things that we must teach, but that does not match the process of learning of students. Which is why systems like Sugata Mitra self-organizing learning environments, my macro simulation, and so on, and rhizomatic systems in general make better space, give better learning spaces for students. So that's one thing. And so the teacher, on the other hand, is told that we have a program, we have a syllabus, we have the curriculum, we must comply with that, and you, student, must do what you're told. Sorry, Anya, I think you're trying to say something.
No, I'm just waiting until you get to the borrowing from overseas.
Well, the borrowing from overseas is basically, and it doesn't have to be borrowing from Australia. All the TESOL programs tend to duplicate themselves. Tend to replicate themselves. They tend to tell the same story. And so when programs are judged by other people, such as, you have a quality assurance program in Vietnam, you have a quality assurance program in Thailand, you have a quality assurance program in Australia. Who do they get to judge the quality of the programs? Well, they get the people who keep replicating the stories from year to year. So 50 years after Krashen or 40 years after Krashen, we're still telling the Krashen story, which is okay. We can tell the Krashen story, but perhaps we can add a little bit of salt and pepper to it. Basically, we repeat the same story year after year after year after year, and we don't allow new things in. Despite the fact that there is a lot of research that is written. But the research that is written tends to be at the level of application of current models. And so we think we're doing very important research, but actually, we're just telling the same story over and over again. Now, does it mean that no progress is made? No, that doesn't mean that no progress is made. There is progress. But when you look at the proficiency ratings of the ASEAN countries, for example, there has been no significant change in over 10 years. And I'm not sure if I showed you last week, but that's actually what's been happening. There is no significant change. Vietnam and China manage to reach the moderate level of proficiency after having been in low proficiency and very low proficiency. Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Thailand tend to stay in the very low proficiency level, and this hasn't changed, despite the fact that we spend millions of dollars, baht, Vietnam dong, and so on, to develop programs of English language teaching. Right? This is catastrophic. But we keep telling the same story again and again and again and hope that the outcome will be different. Albert Einstein used to say that this was the definition of stupidity. Stupidity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome.
But I'm not sure that people who organize these TESOL courses actually want a different outcome. I think this is another problem that
No.
a mind like mine has when I read a lot of literature, is that we can put any narrative to any practice and basically say, oh, look, we're doing all the policies require from us.
Yes.
Look at, so, and then what happens is we need a third, we need a third person to actually come up maybe with a different perspective to enable us to actually get out of that toing and froing. Anya says this matters and TESOL says this matters. So there is this philosopher that I was reading when I was in my 30s. What was his name? John Ralston Saul. And he said that when you put 10 geographers in one room who think that the earth is flat, after the discussion, they will leave the room with the conclusion the earth is flat. And you need a sailor who's been around. So the question which I wanted to indicate, and maybe also answer, because there's little time left. So the question is, so who is the sailor of TESOL? Or is it just different geographers who are fighting? So Andrew says this, whoever, some Christian said that. Okay, you
But
want to
I just want to add one thing. I think we need another Krashen.
We already
because Krashen has actually galvanized the world, and he produced a simple story with a simple discourse which everybody understood and everybody clapped.
Well, nobody understood, and that discourse is continued.
Well, which everybody thought they understood.
All right, so we've got policies, and I have no idea who in Australia writes these education policies. Why isn't this person actually doing teacher education? Because the policy honestly, it might be something wrong with me, but I am probably the only person in Australia that likes Australian policies. So the new paper emerged. I haven't read the paper yet. I've read the executive summary, which itself is about 4 pages or something. So, and in that executive summary, as number one thing that teacher preparation courses must address is the integration of neuroscience into teacher education courses. Number one. Then number 2 is whatever, number 3 was whatever. But the first point is integration of neuroscience, which is that sailor that is so far so much absent from TESOL, right? The sailor that's been around, seen things, never bothered about TESOL, looked at how the human brain processes information and so on. So I thought it was good to see. I think also if education looked into neuroscience in a profound way, as opposed to adjusting its practices, not adjusting the narrative about whatever they've been doing forever, and adjusting the narrative and using the terminology from neuroscience, which is what is being done sometimes, but not actually profoundly looking for the impacts of neuroscience. And I think that we will be closing soon, Andrew. I really want you to talk about your reasons for engaging with COL, becoming COL leader, international COL leader. Everybody, whoever has been from the beginning in that area, knows about Andrew Lian. As you and I discussed it just recently, you've written some papers on the jobs of COL as a resource, as a storage, as a communication tool, as a tutor. So you had that old article, and I think that the vision was quite nice. However, I want to push it further, which is in terms of pedagogy and in terms of higher order thinking that you input into your work. What was COL doing for you that got you so excited that you're still shaking, just thinking, I'm going to go to my computer and do some work now? What got you so excited about COL, intellectually speaking?
Well, as we know, the intellectual stuff or theory comes out of practice, as well, in Bourdieu's sense. So sorry to give you a bit of history, but I will give you a small amount of history. My first desire to enter into the COL world was to do two things. First of all, to relieve teachers from boring practices in class and maximize the value of the classroom. Now, this was in the days before I attacked the notion of the classroom, but anyway. So if we're going to have classroom, let's do the best we can instead of doing, repetitive stuff. People say, oh, that's just what we do in flipped classrooms. Remember the flipped classroom? And the second thing was that I also thought that the ways in which we could use technology to respond to individual students' answers, if you want, to certain problems or language issues could be useful. So the first thing that I wrote was a closed test maker, and it worked very well. So and students would write, in the closed test you have gaps, and the students have to fill in the gaps. And sometimes they write the correct thing or one of the correct things. Sometimes they write some things which are wrong, and you can collect all of these things and you can give feedback appropriate to each of the responses which are made. And I thought, well, that's very good, because it means that students can get some kind of individualized feedback in terms of their understandings of whatever it is that they're currently doing. So that's basically it, and it is in essence what we do in rhizomatic systems. It is in essence what we do in self-managed or self-organized environments, because what we do is we let people experiment or get challenged with something, and then we give them some help and guidance if they require it.
Okay, so this is the framework, right? So this is the framework.
Yeah.
Now we're going closer and closer. So you started in a maybe slightly primitive way because technology was primitive, but also, as you said, from theory emerges from practice. And the first principle you started to have is challenge, and then students feel challenged, and now we give them opportunities or possibilities to explore their way out of a challenge.
Right.
So that's a principle. I don't want it to be lost. It's a principle.
And the principle I formulated at some stage. You go through a process of the 3 C's, which is
Forgot.
the first one is contrast, and then
Compare.
compare, contrast, and
Contest.
and contest. So
Contest.
you go through a problem of confrontation with something, you confront it. You have a challenge, you confront it, you try to solve it. And then you contrast what you see or what you perceive to be the problem with what's in your head, right? It's a process of contrasting and, if you like, comparison. And then you say, well, what if I'm wrong? That's the contestation. And by going through that process with support from teachers or from a machine or from something else, you start refining your understandings in order to be able to solve the problem. And in fact, people do solve it that way.
So
And
the principle that comes from the challenge now. So the principle was the challenge, and then the response of the student was required.
right, right.
What you were saying is there's a process here. So there is not a challenge response, which is the audiolingual, right, method. What you said, there is something there's a space in between to be occupied, which is what we might call, what Wang was referring to, the process of learning. And what you were saying to yourself, okay, so how can I now and this is the 80s. Now we're obviously we have a sophisticated language about it with 5,000 evidences from neuroscience, but back then there's a process between the challenge and response. There's a process. So what you were saying to yourself, this process has to be explorative, because nobody ends up with the correct answer after being challenged. Sometimes people don't know the answer. So what's the process? How can I support the students through that process of getting to the right answer? And what you said, well, first of all, they have to be challenged. Then they confront their response. Then they compare and contrast their response with stuff around. Is it like this? Is it more like that? Maybe I could do this. Maybe I could have done that. So the teacher has to supply opportunities. So this is important. Supply opportunities for students to explore, compare and contrast. But they can act, and these opportunities of compare, contrast enable the student to contest what they thought was right or what they speculated might be the right answer.
Right.
Right? So now we have a process of learning.
Right, and
Confront.
that hasn't changed. I mean, the vocabulary might have changed, but the three C's hasn't changed.
No,
It's
they haven't.
confront,
They've
it's
been
confront,
vindicated.
contrast, and contest. Confront.
They've been
Contrast.
vindicated by Jack Panksepp with his exploratory circuit. So basically he says you've got a circuit for play in your brain, but if you don't ever engage in play, you will not die. You'll just be a little bit weird. But if you, the only time when the human brain doesn't explore, it's when they are dead or in coma.
Well, we don't know about the coma, but we know that when they're dead.
In coma, that's what he says. That's his words.
Well, that's his words. Yes. Okay. Can I just say something very briefly about call and the kind
Yeah,
of
we will
call
finish with this for today.
that I've been talking about, which is where you elicit a response from students and then you analyze that response in some way and then you give them some feedback. That is a better way of doing something like listening comprehension or reading comprehension than what we do in the normal classroom.
Okay, so let's stop
And,
here.
and, and
let's,
why, no, let me just add one more thing. And why
want
is
to-
that so? I'm sorry, I just need to finish. Because the student is inevitably active
Yeah.
and inevitably makes decisions and inevitably goes through the three C's at some personal level. Whereas in the classroom, especially with 50 students like in Thailand, where they look at Facebook instead of listening to the listening task, we have a problem. And one more thing, with systems like ChatGPT being used properly, not badly, and I needed to say something about what Wayne said last time about artificial intelligence. With systems like ChatGPT, we can actually vary the text that people work on.
We can what? We can vary the
Vary.
text.
So not everybody works on this one single text like Lala's students.
Yeah. Can you go back, because I want to close the session for today because it's been an
Yes.
hour. But can you, when I wanted to interrupt you, I wanted to just get that last thing you said to be repeated, because you said the way you do call, and then you came up with this beautiful methodology, beautiful principle, and it just escaped my ears. So it might have escaped other people's ears. I wanted to stress it. What was it? We do with students. I see, that's what I'm saying. So what we do with students, we were talking about that exploration, which is that
Yes.
um, enabling students to actually explore their guesses or their responses to the
Yes.
challenge. And in that way, we enable them to actually contest those, because you're not always right. And then you said the way we do call is to, we can't rewind the tape.
I can't rewind the tape.
So why is it learner centered? It is learner centered, that sort of process,
It's not about
because
giving. It's not. Yeah.
because it
It's not
is
about
because
giving power to. It's not about giving power to the student. It's about enabling students to make decisions, which is not quite the same thing as you are in
right.
charge of your own learning.
Yeah. So that's right, because I think that in the literature there is a mistake very often that learner centered began to mean students take responsibility over their learning. Students, whatever you were saying and Wang was saying, I think these are intuitive definitions of the concept of student learning. I think that's why I was pushing Wang as well earlier to come up with references. So
And
our little discussions here need to be based in references and evidence rather than just I follow this thread. I think there is a problem. There's room for art and intuition, and then there needs to be something
Now,
think underneath it.
in the student center model, now let's just look at the three C's that we just raised. So what if the student don't confront? Wouldn't matter.
that's fine. That's fine.
But they
fine.
flee. They
Then
run away.
that's fine. Then they don't learn.
Yeah. So
And
that is the problem.
that's,
So that
no,
is
no,
the
it's not
problem
a-
between the
no,
gap
it's not a
between
problem.
the gap between student center and learning, like learner center and learning center.
But
Well,
that's not a problem. That's just a problem if you want to insist that they learn something. If you say, I will force you to learn English because it's good for you, or because the government has decided, or something like that. But if you don't want to learn, I don't care. And you shouldn't care.
Yeah, and that is my point about the difference between what we call student center, like learner center, and learning center. It is different. It means,
But
well, in the student center model, when they quit, when they stop learning, well, the learning process do not continue.
no.
But if we say
And
learning
if
center
you
process, we prioritize the role of learning. Like if you don't learn, and I will force you to learn,
no,
and that is that is what people debating about how call should be applied, whether it is learning center or whether it is learner center.
it's neither. It is irrelevant. It's an irrelevant question.
I think meaning making is made by ultimately the person who makes meaning is the student. So I think that's why the student is our focus, and Lala is nodding because that's how our interactions began. I will close our discussion now because we've been here for over an hour, and I think we will take this conversation from here to the next level in 2 weeks. I want to really thank you very much because this is really very nice and very different talking about call. We're talking about call from the intellectual basis in references to evidence and narratives that are out there. We're not just saying, oh, there are games and there are drills and isn't life just simple and beautiful? Really, really enjoyed it. Thank you very much, my dear home team, for being here. And thank you very much, everybody who joined our discussion today. And we'll see you in 2 weeks and we will continue.
Okay.